Hi, I'm Mr. Black. In this video I'm going to be discussing 3 cases involving strange creatures, including a Dragonfly-Man, a Grizzly Bear Man, and a weird grasshopper jumping thing that I don't really know what to call it. A witness, D, who was then only 5 years old, recalls a bizarre experience she had while picnicking with her family in New York State Park in the summer of 1967. In a bid for some privacy, her mother had chosen an area of the park that was tucked into a spot surrounded by thick forest. At some point during the day, Dee recalls that she and her older sister left to use the toilet facility. She remembered that as they walked away from the picnic spot, the trees and grass suddenly got more dense and thick until their picnic area was no longer visible through the foliage. It was almost immediately after losing sight of her parents that things would take a turn for the weird. Dee claims that her memory at this point suddenly blanks. The next thing she recalled was walking into a clearing in the forest. In the center of the clearing, she observed a huge round gray boulder or rock. Sitting atop the boulder was what appeared to be a giant human-sized dragonfly, a Dragonfly-Man. She became paralyzed looking at this entity, and it stared back at her. She noted that the head of the creature was the size of her head. It had big black eyes that appeared to shine. While it sat there, the wings on it were stretched out and going slowly up and down. The wings stretched out about 3 feet in each direction and were glistening green, red, and blue and appeared, quote, clear as the sky. She isn't exactly sure how long they stared at each other, though she senses that it was less than 3 minutes. Whatever this thing was, it frightened her and she felt she needed to get away. When she turned to scream and run, she noticed that her mother was on the left and her sister was on the right, just outside the clearing in the woods. Strangely, both were standing frozen with their backs to the clearing. She ran over and shook her mother's hand several times and got her to move, like she had snapped out of a trance. She begged her mother to follow her back to the clearing, but when they got there, nothing was there. Not even the rock. The rest of the day, all the grown-ups at the picnic seemed to be in an almost trance-like state, acting strangely and constantly talking about the drifting clouds and the breezy, windy weather. Albert Rosales spoke to the witness directly about this incident, and he believes that, despite her age, she was being truthful about what happened. Her memory of that day and all of its strangeness is still quite vivid all these years later. There are things about this case that really stick out to me. I think maybe that this might have been an instance of a screen memory. The rock she saw might not have been a rock, might have been possibly a UFO or something that she had stumbled upon. I do find it interesting that the witness said that her mother and her sister were standing outside the clearing with their backs turned in like a trance-like state. That to me suggests that there was a lot more going on that day than what she could remember. Maybe the whole group were abducted. I don't know. The whole thing is so strange, but it does to me sound like it was like a mass abduction event, given that everyone else around that day was acting so strangely. But on the other hand, I don't know. In the next case I'm going to be talking about, a man claims that he encountered a weird grizzly bear-like entity. It was 1968. Brian Birch, his wife, their 3 young children, and Brian's mother were on the way to Brian's brother's house in the countryside of Devonshire. It was around 1 a.m. and his children and mother were asleep in the back seat. After passing the town of Honiton, they turned down a long straight road that stretched way ahead of them. It was a narrow road with grass verges on both sides and lots of flat farmland. Brian recalls they were approaching a 90-degree bend in the road that passed over a small hump bridge over a railway line. He had his headlights on full beam on the approach to that bridge when he saw what he thought initially was a large badger by its ambling gait along the short grassy embankment on the right-hand side of the road. As they drew close to it and got ready to pass it, Brian suddenly realized this was no badger. It was something he'd never seen before. A huge creature slowly stood upright, standing on its hind legs. It turned to face them. Brian was confused. At first glance, this thing looked like a grizzly bear. It even had the same gait as a grizzly bear. Its arms and legs, the whole body in fact, looked positively grizzly bear-like. But the face was wrong. Brian focused on the creature's face, and the features, unlike the muzzle of a grizzly bear, appeared flat and decidedly pink, almost human-like. He had the impression of a pink sponge-like face, like a bath sponge. He knew instantly that this was no grizzly bear. He had no idea what it was. His brief examination of the creature was interrupted by a loud scream. It was his wife. "What is that?" she screamed, startling Brian and everyone else in the car. Brian instinctively swerved to the left-hand side of the road to avoid passing close to the creature, which he referred to as grotesque. Brian now floored the gas pedal momentarily before they came to the 90-degree turn over the small humpback bridge that passed over the railway. For the rest of that journey, he dreaded the possibility of encountering that strange creature one more time, but luckily they didn't see it again. Neither did he ever see it again during his countless drives through the area. Albert Rosales also reached out to Brian Birch about his bizarre encounter. Even today, he has no idea what he and his wife encountered on that lonely stretch of road. In 1986, in Rio Grande Norte, Brazil, a family encountered a bizarre creature that left them terrified. Ignacio Este Machado, his wife, oldest daughter, and his 2-year-old daughter, which Ignacio carried in his arms, were returning home from a neighbor's house after watching a popular soap opera. In order to get back to their house, they had to traverse a very dark and isolated dirt road. Ignacio's wife was the first to notice a strange noise, and she thought that somebody was following them on the road. Ignacio noted that his wife was growing increasingly more disturbed, and he had them stop walking a couple of times to see if they could hear somebody behind them, but they couldn't. They carried on walking, and soon Ignacio too began to hear the noises. He became convinced that somebody or something was following them. Ignacio decided to have his family stop. He walked back down the road, hoping to figure out what was going on. As his wife and oldest daughter stood talking, Ignacio wandered further down the road, all while carrying his 2-year-old in his arms. As he stood looking around, Ignacio was stunned when a strange creature suddenly appeared from the woods on the side of the road. He described the creature as between 3 and 4 feet tall, walking on 2 legs and wearing a very tight-fitting black coverall. It had an abundance of stringy black hair on its head, which covered its face. It advanced towards Ignacio using strange hopping motions resembling that of a grasshopper. The creature approached him and attempted to snatch his daughter out of his arms. Ignacio jumped back and threw a couple of wild punches at the strange creature, which quickly jolted back. At this point, Ignacio's wife and oldest daughter, who had wandered down the road towards him, took notice of the creature and both screamed in terror. For whatever reason, the sound of their screams seemed to startle the entity, which turned and ran off into a field, emitting a loud buzzing sound. They watched as it effortlessly jumped a nearby barbed wire fence and disappeared quickly into the brush. Ignacio was convinced that the strange creature was trying to grab his youngest daughter from his arms, though he did not know why. Over the course of the next several days, Ignacio felt as though he was being watched from behind the bushes as he walked to and from work. This case was reported to and investigated by Equipe IPURN, a Brazilian-based UFO organization.